I knew things were about to change the moment I started at my new school. I had been born and raised in Philadelphia, and now I was moving an hour away from the city. That kind of shift meant I'd have to adjust, learn to live with it. I kept to myself and stayed out of trouble, mostly because my father expected it and my mother insisted on it. The town I moved to was a real mix of people, to say the least. There were some black folks, a few Latinos, a couple Italians, and some Jewish families. But the majority were these stubborn Dutch people, German Lutherans who ran everything. They weren't Amish or Mennonites, but they definitely made their presence known in every corner of the town. It was a melting pot, so I didn't have any major issues fitting in, but I still miss my friends back in Philly. After graduation, I decided to stay close to home to be near my family. I still went back to the old neighborhood now, and then stayed in touch with the old crew. I got my first job driving a fuel oil truck. After a few years, I worked inside, dispatching, taking orders, and running the business. I had a knack for it. I could see myself owning a business like that someday, no problem. My social life wasn't too bad either. I had no trouble making friends, especially with women. When I married Heather, my mother wasn't thrilled that she wasn't Italian, but she did her best to make Heather feel welcome. A couple of kids later, Heather pushed me to get the procedure done. I didn't mind it, but once the kids started school, she wanted to go back to work. My dad never thought it was a good idea for a mother to work outside the home. I didn't fully understand his reasoning at the time, but looking back, I get it. It wasn't that I had a problem with Heather working, but more that she started hanging around with her old friends from school, people I didn't really care for. Some of her friends were fine, but others I couldn't stand. She had been active in school clubs, always surrounded by people who thought they were better than everyone else. I had avoided those kinds of people all my life. I knew Heather had been with other guys before we met, but we never really discussed our pasts. It wasn't something we needed to talk about, it just never came up. We'd been married for 10 years when things started to fall apart. Heather had been working at a local national insurance company in the claims department. I didn't think much of it until she started working more overtime, and even on weekends. About 6 months later, I realized something wasn't right. The seminar she was going to was the tipping point. "Jake, I just don't see why you're making a big deal about this. It's only for 3 days. I already talked to your mom, and she'll stay with the kids. You'll be home in the evenings. You can cook for yourself," she said, as if it was a simple request. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to ask me that. "Who else is going to this seminar?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. She brightened up a bit. "Just 6 girls from the department. Betty Klink from personnel, and Todd," she said, her voice trailing off. At that moment, I felt a chill run through me. I was stunned. After everything that had happened, she was still lying to my face. Todd, her boss. I smiled a little, but not because I was amused. Heather and Todd had grown up together. He was the type of guy who was in every club, every activity, except for sports. The kind of guy who always seemed to have something up his sleeve. "Do you really think I'm that stupid, Heather?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I've known about you and Todd for 6 months. If you think I'm going to let you go away with him for 3 days, you've lost your mind." Her face paled. "What? What are you talking about? Todd is my boss. Nothing's going on between us. I would never cheat on you. You know that." I took a slow sip of beer and just stared at the empty can in my hand. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and crushed the can in my hand. I threw it toward the trash, but missed, and I didn't bother to pick it up. I opened another can of beer, the fizz escaping with a hiss. I sat back down, not looking at her. "You're the mother of my children, Heather, and as a mother, you do a good job," I said slowly, making sure my words landed. "But the only reason I haven't kicked you out is because of them. I talked to my mom about this. She says I should stay firm and hope you get it out of your system for the kids' sake. If I get rid of you, the courts will give you the kids, and I can't let that happen." She looked at me, her face going from confusion to frustration. "You told your mother that I'm cheating on you?" she asked, almost incredulously. "No, Ian Suarat," a lady from church told her. I didn't deny it when she confronted me. Heather was clearly rattled, almost shaking. "I don't believe you, Jake. Why are you saying all this?" I smiled bitterly and took another swig of beer. "I know about Todd's place. He lives at 321 David Drive, just 3 blocks from your office. You and your boss go there, what, 3 times a week?" Spend almost 3 hours there every time. What exactly do you do at his apartment for 3 hours, Heather? I let the question hang in the air. And did you know that your office cleaning lady also goes to church with my mom? Her eyes watered, and her lower lip trembled. You can stay, or you can leave, but I'm not giving you my kids. And as long as you don't make a scene or embarrass me in front of anyone, I won't do anything. But if you do, all bets are off. She stood up abruptly, her anger flaring. Damn you, Jake. I hate you, she shouted. And with that, she stormed off, tears streaming down her face. It was the first time she had ever cursed at me. The first time she'd ever insulted me or my heritage. The gloves were off now. We had 2 boys, Terry and Rick, who shared a room with bunk beds. The third bedroom was just a catch-all, and that's where I slept from that moment on. We were renting a house, and although we'd saved over $60,000 for a down payment on a new home, everything felt like a nightmare. We never spoke about the seminar again. Heather didn't work overtime anymore, and she brought her lunch to the office. At home, the atmosphere wasn't just chilly, it was freezing. My mom had no new gossip from her church friends, and it felt like everything was slowly going back to normal. But I felt uncomfortable, like something wasn't right. There was no intimacy anymore, and I wasn't going to put up with that for much longer. Despite everything, I agreed to go with Heather to her company Christmas party. I didn't want her to go alone, and I figured I could just hang back and stay out of the way. It sounded like a good plan at first, but it was full of flaws. The company had rented a hall with a dance floor, a buffet table, and a couple of open bars. I figured I could nurse 3 beers all night long and make it through without feeling any pain. By the time we arrived, the only seats left were near the company bigwigs. It was obvious that everyone else was avoiding those spots. The first hour was fine, but then I noticed Todd across the room, hanging out with some of his friends. Heather was asked to dance by some of her colleagues, but Todd stayed put. That was a relief. I didn't want to dance either. I was just finishing my 3rd beer when I saw Heather and Todd exchange a few looks. It wasn't much, just a few nods and head tilts, but I knew something was going on. I tried to act like I didn't care, just killing time but still watching them. Heather excused herself to use the ladies' room, and I noticed Todd was gone. It was unbelievable. After everything we'd talked about at home, she was still trying to meet up with him in the middle of the party? Was she trying to humiliate me in front of everyone? I could see the grins on Todd's buddies as they watched from the bar. Heather glanced back at me before heading down the hallway to the restrooms, just to make sure I was still sitting there. I got up and headed toward the restrooms myself, stopping by the head table on the way. I leaned in and apologized for disturbing the party, just to get their attention. The guys across the room, the ones grinning like idiots, suddenly stopped smiling. They looked agitated, unsure of what to do next. I wasn't done yet. I went into the ladies' room first, but it was empty. I had better luck in the men's room, and from there, everything seemed to happen in double time. There they were, Todd and Heather, locked in a kiss. His back was to me, and his hand was up her skirt. She didn't even seem to resist. I grabbed Todd by the back of his neck, took a quick step sideways, and slammed his head forward into the bathroom tile. I heard something crack, and I was pretty sure it wasn't just the tile. Heather's voice was calling my name over and over, but I didn't care. I spun Todd around, and, as his nose broke, blood splattered all over my shirt. He was limp, but somehow still standing, so I landed a solid punch to his stomach. He dropped to the ground, immediately starting to vomit. Heather grabbed at my jacket sleeve, but it was useless. She couldn't stop me. Things were eerily quiet in the main hall as I dragged Todd by his necktie to the middle of the dance floor. I might have been choking him, but honestly I didn't care. The band had stopped playing, and every single eye in the room was on me. I dropped him like a rag doll and looked around, waiting to see if anyone would step in to help him. No one did. I'm sorry for ruining your party, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. But I'm going now. I'll leave my wife here for your entertainment. Someone could drop her off at the house when you're done with her. Todd was on his hands and knees, trying to get up, his face a bloody mess. Heather was standing in the doorway, her mouth hanging open. I couldn't tell if she was upset about what I'd done to her lover or what I'd just said to all of her coworkers. Honestly, it didn't matter. I noticed Todd was directly under the mistletoe. I couldn't resist. Before I left, I gave him a kick in the balls that he was sure to remember for at least a week. He crumpled forward, smashing his face into the floor again. That had to hurt. No one said a word. I called my mom from the car and asked her to pick up the kids. I figured heading out of town for a few days was a good idea. I didn't want to leave them with Heather. I knew she wouldn't be in any condition to care for them. As I drove, I was already making plans. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I needed a break. My boss didn't mind giving me a week off. By the time I got to my parents' place, they were already there. After paying the babysitter, I helped get the boys ready. I packed a single bag, mostly socks and underwear, but I threw in a few shirts and pants just in case. Before I left, I grabbed the cash box from the basement rafters. Banks were paying less than 1% interest on savings, so I figured I'd keep the $62,000 at home. I know it was stupid to keep that much cash in the house, but it's just something I inherited from my mom. She always kept large sums hidden around the kitchen. I was turning off the lights when I saw a cab pull up outside. It dropped Heather off, and she walked in, plopping down on the couch without saying a word. She didn't look mad, more worried, more upset than anything. "I told you there was only one rule," I said, looking at her. "Don't humiliate me or my family in public." "But you just couldn't resist, could you?" I waited for a moment, letting it sink in as she started to cry. Then I walked out the door. It was just a little past 9 p.m. when I hit the Schuylkill Expressway. Damn, I thought to myself, that party didn't last long for me. I decided to spend a few days in Atlantic City before heading back home. But first, I needed to see an old friend. Joe had a sandwich shop in the old neighborhood. It wasn't anything fancy, like the ones you see in Philly tourist films. It was more of a convenient spot for the locals. Joe's primary business came from some side ventures that most people either ignored or participated in. He lived on the second floor and worked out of the back room. It felt like stepping back in time. After I explained my situation, he agreed to help. "Jake, it's going to cost you 20 grand. Can you handle that? Or do you need me to spot you?" Joe asked. "No problem, I've got it," I replied. "Do you want it messy or quiet?" "Transparent," he said with a grin. "No fuss, no muss. But you'll need to leave for a few days. Got anything planned?" "Thinking of going to Atlantic City," I said. "How about 6 days and 7 nights at the Taj?" Joe offered. I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about, Joe?" "I've got some comps coming. I think it'll work out for you," he explained. "Sounds good. But am I going alone?" I asked. Joe laughed. "You shouldn't be alone, Jake. You need someone to vouch for you while you're there." Before I could respond, Joe picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Carla? It's Joe. Make yourself pretty and get your ass down here." He chuckled as he hung up. "Do you remember Carla? My brother Michael's oldest daughter? Chubby little thing with dark brown eyes?" I smiled at the memory. "Yeah, I remember. She was always laughing. How old is she now?" Joe grinned. "She's 23 now, and she ain't chubby anymore." That's when it hit me. Carla was going to be joining me in Atlantic City. It felt a little uncomfortable since she was Joe's niece. But hey, he was setting it up, not me. "You got a credit card?" Joe asked. "Yeah, I've got 2. I was planning to cancel them Monday," I said. "Don't do that. I want you to use those cards as much as you can. Meals, room service, even some casino cash advances. But don't go overboard. You need that card action to show you were really there. Spread it out so it doesn't look like you snuck back home. It'll cost you a couple of bucks, but it's cheap insurance," Joe advised. He knew his stuff. It all made sense. Carla walked in, and when she saw me, her face lit up. "Jake, I haven't seen you since you moved up to the sticks. You look good." Joe had been smiling at me, but now his grin got wider. Carla was absolutely gorgeous. Those dark eyes were even more striking, and all the baby fat she used to have had moved elsewhere. I fumbled with my chair and almost knocked it over in my rush to stand up. "Carla, Tony needs someone to keep him company in Atlantic City for a few days. Are you up for it?" Her expression shifted a bit. "Aren't you still married?" she asked, eyeing me. Before I could answer, Joe jumped in. "The marriage is dead, Carla. Tony needs a break. He's been through some stuff," Joe said. "I know you liked him, so I thought of you first." Carla's face turned serious. "I'm not going to break up anyone's family. It's not right for you to ask me to do this, Joe. Besides, I'm not one of your hookers." Joe didn't miss a beat. "I don't expect you to sleep with him. Just keep him company. Help him forget about his troubles." Carla seemed to understand, a little smile tugging at her lips. Okay, I'll go with you, Tony, but you have to promise to buy me some saltwater taffy. We all laughed, and she headed off to get ready. Joe and I recapped the plan while Carla was getting ready. He graciously accepted my 20 grand and promised everything would go smoothly. When Carla came back, I could tell she was ready. The drive to Atlantic City was uneventful, except I found myself telling Carla all about my issues with Heather. She just nodded and said, "Oh, the poor kids." We did a little gambling, but I knew the odds weren't in my favor. Carla was happy with the quarter slots. Me? I was just trying to kill time. We spent most of our time eating, walking the boardwalk, and catching every show in town. I played the perfect gentleman on the first night, but by noon on the second day, Carla and I were tearing up the sheets. I started to feel like maybe my mother had been right. Perhaps I should have married an Italian girl. Everything felt so natural with Carla, and in that moment, I didn't feel like I was cheating. We were getting ready for dinner on the fourth day when there was a knock on the door. Two men entered. They weren't in suits, but in sports jackets. "Jake Randazzo," one of them said. I turned, wondering what this was all about. The door to the hotel room opened, and two men stepped inside. "Jake Randazzo?" one of them asked. "I'm Jack Fritz, and this is my partner, Rupert Marks. We're with the Berks County Special Crimes Task Force. Mind if we have a word?" Sarah, who had just come out of the bathroom in her lingerie, glanced at the men before walking over to the bed to grab her bathrobe. She looked slightly embarrassed, but didn't seem surprised. She probably knew something like this might happen. "Do you mind giving me an idea of what this is about?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Fritz, who was doing all the talking, looked uncomfortable, but Rupert couldn't take his eyes off Sarah. "We'd like to talk about your relationship with Todd Foote," Fritz said. I froze for a second. I didn't have a relationship with Todd Foote. My wife, Heather, did. "Mr. Randazzo, we understand you had an altercation with Todd last Friday at the Continental Insurance Christmas party," Fritz continued. "Why is he pressing charges?" I asked, a little annoyed. "No," Fritz replied, his voice tight. "Todd's disappeared, and we're wondering if you might be able to help us locate him." I raised an eyebrow. "Gentlemen, before we go any further, I'd like to have someone from the Atlantic City Police Department present. And I don't mean just some guy in a blue suit. If you can't arrange that, I'll be needing my lawyer from Reading." There was a long pause. Neither of the men said anything. "Sarah, get dressed. We're going to dinner," I said, standing up. "Sorry, fellows, but we have a 6 o'clock reservation at the safari. The steaks there are fantastic. I'll probably be back home this Friday. Would you like me to come talk to you then?" They both seemed dumbfounded. "Why do you think something happened to him? Maybe he just left town for a while?" I asked casually, giving them a pointed look. "Well, he was seen getting into a taxi outside the Community General Hospital on Sunday morning," Fritz said. "And no one's seen him since." "Well," I replied, "I've been here since Friday night, and you could check with the hotel staff if you need confirmation. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have dinner to get to." As I led Sarah toward the door, I made a point of steering them gently out of the room. We took the elevator down together, but no one said a word. Once we got to the lobby, they headed toward hotel security, and Sarah and I made our way to the safari. When I got home later, Terry and Rick were all over me, excited about the saltwater taffy I brought them. Heather, on the other hand, was cold and distant. It was clear she had no idea what was expected of her after the whole police visit. I spent the rest of the afternoon with the boys, planning to talk to Heather that evening. Once the kids were settled in front of the TV, I sat down at the kitchen table, waiting for Heather to finish cleaning up. She took longer than usual, but I didn't move. Finally, she turned around and sat across from me, her elbows resting on the Formica countertop. "What did you do with Todd?" she asked, her voice calm, but with a genuine concern. I was quiet for a moment, watching her. "I was in Atlantic City all week. I haven't seen Todd since the party." "You heard him, didn't you?" she asked, looking uncomfortable. "I hope so," I said. "He was in the hospital for 2 days after what happened. I broke his jaw and nose." She didn't have any more questions for me after that. "What were you doing with him in the men's room?" I asked, leaning forward. I waited, but Heather just stared at the table, wringing her hands. "Why did he have his hand up your skirt?" I asked again, more insistently. There was no answer, so I pressed on. "Why aren't you at work? What are the kids doing home on a school day?" "I had to quit work," she said almost too quickly. There was no way I could go back there again. I took the boys out of school because your mother said you might be home today. I sat back in my chair, staring at her. Heather, we had one rule. One. You couldn't do anything that would humiliate me or our family. It was simple. Why did you feel the need to ruin everything by violating that? Heather started to shift uncomfortably, clearly starting to feel the weight of the conversation. I slammed my fist on the table, making her flinch. Why, damn it? Answer me. I don't know why, she finally said, her voice trembling. I don't know why. It just happened. You were sitting there like a lost puppy, and we thought we could take advantage of it. We didn't know you were going to snap. You acted like a madman. I was scared to death. I couldn't make sense of any of it, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. They had weeks to meet before the party, and I never would have known about it. The only reason they chose that time and place was to humiliate me. Heather, you have 3 choices, I said coldly. You can stay here and be a proper mother to your children. You can get a divorce and leave without the kids. Or you can just disappear. If you stay, we will not be living as man and wife, and I won't tolerate any more affairs, not with Todd or anyone else. At the mention of Todd's name, Heather broke down into tears, her shoulders shaking. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she bolted from the room, crying uncontrollably. I sat there, seething, knowing I'd have to finish that conversation tomorrow. I moved into a small apartment just a few blocks from the house. It was close enough that the boys could walk over any time they wanted to. Sarah moved in with me shortly after, and I didn't mind. The police checked in with me a couple more times, but then they stopped. Todd Foote was last seen getting into a taxi outside the hospital and had disappeared without a trace. His family offered a reward for information, but no one ever came forward. Every night, I had dinner with Heather and the boys. I spent as much time as I could with them on weekends. It was clear to everyone that Heather and I were no longer a couple, though we were still technically married. Heather spent most of her time with her parents or her sister. I didn't care about that. She quit her job right after the Christmas party and didn't seem interested in getting another one. She played the part of the good mother, keeping the house neat, feeding the boys well, and making sure they had clean clothes. I took care of the lawn and all the outside work. Heather received $200 a week for household expenses, food, and personal needs. I always asked her if she wanted more, but she refused every time. We didn't use credit cards anymore. During the holidays, the boys and I went to my family's house, and Sarah usually joined us. Heather spent Thanksgiving and Christmas with her family, but had Christmas Eve with the boys. Things were awkward whenever Terry or Rick brought up the situation between Heather and me, but neither of us was willing to discuss it. I appreciated that Heather kept quiet. What could she say? The farce continued for years, of course. It wasn't all smooth sailing, and complications and disagreements were a constant. But we managed. Things with Sarah were fine at first, but over time, she started spending more time with her family in Philly and less with me. I couldn't blame her. I was indebted to her for helping me through the breakup. I knew I couldn't divorce Heather, not while the boys were still living at home. And as long as they were there, I couldn't throw her out either. They were all self-imposed limitations, but I stuck to them. I hated the situation, but I couldn't think of a better alternative. The turning point came when Terry was 16. A new kid at school, Todd's nephew, started provoking Terry about the situation. It was the first time any of this had ever come up, and Terry wasn't ready for it. Todd's nephew ended up in the hospital, and I had to pick up Terry from school. He was expelled for 2 weeks and facing possible assault charges. Unfortunately, Rick was there too and tried to help his brother. He ended up losing 2 teeth in the process, but he earned Terry's respect for trying. When we got home, Heather was there waiting for us. Terry immediately began to tear into her for not talking to them about what happened years ago. Heather didn't offer any defense. Heather just stood there, silent, as our oldest son, Terry, let his anger out. I didn't interfere. I left them alone and took Rick to the dentist. Rick wasn't too upset about the missing teeth, but I wasn't thrilled about the upcoming dental bills. When we got back home, Heather was gone. Her car was still parked outside, but she wasn't there. Terry said she just grabbed her purse and walked out without saying a word or offering any kind of explanation. I took a week off work to let things settle down. Heather's parents and sister wouldn't even talk to me. After a week, I still had no idea where she was or what her intentions were. Sarah and I moved into the house. At first, sharing a bed with her felt uncomfortable, but the boys adapted much quicker than I expected. Everything that had been Heather's or tied to her disappeared one day while I was at work. I never asked Sarah what she did with it. It was gone, and that was that. Sarah took over all the duties Heather used to handle. I got her a few credit cards to make things easier. It was strange trusting my mistress more than my wife. I sold Heather's car and bought a new one for Sarah. Family gatherings became less stressful with the new arrangement. Sarah was happier, and my mother was thrilled. Terry and Rick had no more trouble at school, and Todd's nephew never showed up again. Things were finally looking up, but I was still married to Heather. I waited 2 months before reporting Heather to the police as a missing person, more specifically, a runaway spouse. That way, I could use the report as grounds for divorce based on abandonment. I waited another 2 months, then filed the divorce papers. I knew I'd have to wait a year for the divorce to go through, but I was planning ahead. In the meantime, things at home had become more peaceful. Terry and Rick had no problem talking to Sarah. They called her Sarah instead of Mom, but it was fine. We were a family more so than we'd been in years. Then, one day, completely out of the blue, my final divorce decree came in the mail. I was free. 2 weeks later, Sarah and I drove down to Elton and tied the knot. It felt official, like we were finally a family. Terry graduated from school and joined the Air Force. A year later, Rick went to meat cutting school in Toledo. Things happened fast. Before long, Sarah and I were alone, living our life. We never heard from Heather again. My parents moved to Ocala and made everyone promise to visit at least twice a year. There was nothing holding us to reading anymore, so Sarah and I decided to move back to Philly. Rick found a job at a high-end butcher shop in Westchester after he graduated, and we saw him a few times a month. He always brought something nice to surprise us with. Life was moving on, and it was good. A year later, one of Sarah's nieces was getting married. We had to go. An Italian wedding in Philly was a big deal. It wasn't just about the couple, it was about the whole extended family. Lots of relatives and freeloaders showing up for the booze and food. But there was always enough to go around. We were sitting with some friends, enjoying the evening, when I noticed that Sarah seemed a little on edge. She kept glancing across the dance floor, staring at something. I took a few quick looks but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I forgot about it until Sarah excused herself to go to the ladies' room. Something didn't feel right. I watched her walk toward the back of the hall, where she met up with one of her old friends. They were chatting, and there was some posturing, but it didn't seem too suspicious. Sarah never actually went to the restroom. Instead, she walked over to a table with a few people. 3 men and 3 women, all overdressed and looking like they were trying too hard. When Sarah came back, her face was pensive but confident. "Jake, we have a small problem," she said quietly. "I figured something was up from your walk around the room. Want to explain? You've got to keep your cool for a few minutes. One of the guys from Gina's table is going to come over here and try to bait you," she explained. "Bait me? What the hell are you talking about? He's going to say some insulting things about me, trying to get you mad. When you get up to fight him, the 3 of them are going to jump you. It's a setup." I was starting to get a bad feeling. What do I do? Just let him get away with it. "Play along," Sarah said. "Let him insult me and then agree with him. If he calls me a slut, ask him how much he's willing to pay. Whatever you do, don't let him rile you up. We need to buy some time for Bobby V and the boys to get into position. You might have to handle one of them, but that's the worst of it." I was in disbelief. What the hell brought all this on? What did I do to these guys? "Look over at Gina's table," she said, pointing. "See the one with the platinum hair? That's Heather." My heart skipped a beat. What the hell is she doing here? I asked, feeling my blood run cold. "Her boyfriend is somehow related to the bride. Looks like she's still pissed at you and set this up to get back at you. When she realized you were here, I guess she thought it was time for some payback. While you and the guys are dealing with this out here, Gina and I will have a little chat with Heather in the ladies' room," Sarah said, her tone grim. I didn't like the way things were unfolding. This was supposed to be a celebration, a special night for a young bride. It wasn't fair for some goons to ruin it. About 10 minutes later, I saw Heather's boyfriend get up from his seat. I stood up, excused myself from the table, and walked over to the side fire exit where people were stepping outside for a smoke. Heather's boyfriend and the other two guys followed me. But they didn't see the three guys waiting behind the bar with baseball bats. There were about 6 guys smoking outside, and I told them to scram. They didn't argue. The urgency in my voice must have been clear. I walked about 20 paces away from the door, stopped, and turned around. The guys came out smiling, but their grins disappeared when they turned and saw 3 men with bats and the father of the bride standing there. It was over in less than 30 seconds. I didn't even raise a hand. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience I caused you or your family on this special night," I said to Heather's boyfriend, feeling like a character out of The Godfather. "Thanks for having the decency to take it outside." He shook my hand, turned, and walked back to his daughter. I thanked the guys who helped me and went back inside to find Sarah. The room was quiet now. Heather's table was empty, and Rick had caught wind of the commotion. He found me at the bar, getting a fresh draft. "Dad, what the hell's going on?" he asked, looking confused. I wasn't going to explain everything, not in a crowded bar. "Your mother was here with her new boyfriend," I said, cutting it short. Rick didn't need to know the details. "I don't need to know anything more than that," he said, smiling, and asked the bartender for a beer of his own. We spent the next hour chatting about other things. About half an hour later, Sarah showed up, looking a little disheveled. "Where have you been?" I asked her. She gave me a wicked little smile. "Gina and I had to take your ex-wife to the hospital. She wasn't feeling too well." Rick and I couldn't help laughing. "Tony, can we go home now?" Sarah asked, clearly done with the night. It had been a long night, but it was also a lot of fun. We never heard from Heather again. Sarah and I are still together, living in the old neighborhood. Life is great. And with that, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring fresh, captivating stories every day. So click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.